Conformity to the world. Be not conformed to this world. Romans 12:2. It will be recollected by some who are present that some time since I made use of this text in preaching in this place, but the object of this evening's discourse is far from different, that it is not improper to employ the same text again. The following is the order in which I design to discuss the subject of conformity to the world. 1. To show what is not meant by the command of the text. 2. Show what is meant by the command, be not conformed to this world. 3. To mention some of the reasons why this requirement is made upon all who will live a godly life. 4. To answer some objections that are made to the principles laid down. 1. I am to show what is not meant by the requirement, be not conformed to this world. I suppose it is not meant that Christians should refuse to benefit by the useful arts, improvements, and discoveries of the world. It is not only the privilege but the duty of the friends of God to avail themselves of these, and to use for God all the really useful arts and improvements that arise among mankind. Commentary. So basically, he's starting this thing off by saying, the Bible does not teach be Amish. He was aware of that. He lived up in the Northeast. He knew the Pennsylvania Dutch were out there, the Amish groups. He's saying this is not what is meant. The New Testament nowhere commands that Christians, in order to be godly, in other words, the Bible concept of godliness does not mean be Amish, separate yourself completely physically from the rest of society and live in an Amish community and not ever use modern technologies. Okay. Now it's clearly true that there is a pattern of godliness in terms of monasticism in the Bible. A lot of people who are Protestants probably do not recognize this, but monastics are in the Bible, and you could even possibly give the argument that monogamous monastics are in the Bible. So the Amish thing, it's tough. You want to say, well, first off, who are the monastics you have in mind? The sons of the prophets. Samuel and his band of prophets, and then Elijah, Elisha, and his band of prophets, which are probably all from the same tradition. They're not living in the city normally. They're living out in, Samuel did, but at least in Elijah's time, they were living out in the wilderness, and some of them were married and had kids, and so that is very Amish-like, actually. But that's not to say that they didn't use modern technologies. It's more similar to, honestly, I'm going to be honest, the sons of the prophets is very Amish. Like if you really, really study the sons of the prophets in the Old Testament. And of course the Essenes that John the Baptist was probably part of for a time. This idea of pulling away from the world in order to have a more devout and clean life. The Catholic saints throughout history, throughout medieval times, they living in monasteries away from society, had tons of miraculous experience, supernatural experiences, miraculous gifts. It seems that that's how the charismatic gifts were preserved throughout history. So there's something to be said about this idea of pulling away from the world, physically and economically. On the other hand, Charles Finney, when he looks at the New Testament, he doesn't really see a whole lot of support for that. I mean, you might have some support for it in the Old Testament, the sons of the prophets, like I said, but in the New Testament, it's not really there. It's not really there. This idea of stealing away from society. Now, if anybody knows a little thing about church history, we do know that in the book of Acts, there were times of persecution, and it was oftentimes very hard for Christians to be engaged in business because they were in hiding all the time because of the intense violent persecution. So they had all things in common in the book of Acts. And then there was also a time after the book of Acts called Titus came. He was a Roman commander, and he came and he sacked Jerusalem. And by dreams and visions, Christians in Jerusalem were warned by God in dreams and visions. I think this is in Eusebius, the church history, to go to a rock city in the Middle East called Petra. And Petra is portrayed in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That's where the end scene is, where the guys get their heads cut off and Indiana Jones walks across air in order to get to the Crusader. Indiana Jones Last Crusade. That place that they go to is Petra. And I think that's where, during the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed, that's where the Christians in Jerusalem hung out. But again, that's a time of persecution. And if you really look at the Amish, they're coming from the Anabaptist tradition where they were being persecuted by both Catholics and by Lutherans. So it's like these persecution type traditions develop. And if you look even about the Catholic saints and the sons of the prophets, they're both coming from situations in which violent persecution is going on. I mean, you've got in the Old Testament where the prophets are being hid away in a cave, like 100 of them, right? And then in the Catholic monastics, the monasticism in the medieval times grew out of the Desert Fathers in the 300s AD, and they, same thing, Roman persecution, Christians being thrown in the Colosseum and stuff. So they were fleeing into the desert. So it seems that even in the Old Testament and in post New Testament times, every time anything that looks like monasticism or Amish or just this idea of just stealing away from society, Christians going out and living in the wilderness and stuff, in the country, in the desert, it's always because it's been provoked by violent persecution in the cities. So what Charles Finney's trying to say here is that you don't need to steal away from society when the violent persecution wears down. If there's not violent persecution going on, if you're not in like a Voice of the Martyrs type situation, then yeah, live in the city. I mean, conduct as much business as you can. Try to get away with it. But there's a definite tension here that needs to be observed. That when persecution becomes intense enough, that when it reaches a certain height, a fever pitch, the general tendency in church history has been for saints to steal away into the country, to get away from it all. And you got to really ask yourself, why not steal away in the country already? just in case. I know that might sound alarmist, but another thing is this. If this is the tendency of people's hearts, ask yourself this. Ask yourself this. If you're not being persecuted at work or wherever you are, why aren't you being persecuted? And then ask yourself, do you have an Amish inclination? Do you have an inclination to be Amish? Do you have an inclination in your heart? You might not be living that, right? But do you have an inclination to be living in a monastery? I mean, is there some sort of a hidden desire in your heart that says, man, I wish I could just move out into the country or something, And I think that that's a godly desire, honestly. I do. I know it sounds extreme, but I think that's a godly desire to want to flee from the world. What does it say in Pilgrim's Progress? Flee from the wrath to come. Flee from the city of destruction. I think that's a godly desire to not want to live right in the midst of Sodom and Gomorrah, but to rather to want to escape from it. Abraham has absolutely no desire, not even to rescue Lot. I mean, he's just like, I just don't even want to get in there. I don't want even a shoelace from the king of Sodom, I don't want to touch that, But at the same time, it's like this. And I kind of I agree with Finney. Finney is saying technology happens, arts improvements happen. There's nothing wrong with those things. We can so isolate ourselves from society that we don't even use computers or telephones and stuff like this, and that's just not necessary. All right, let me get back to this. 2. I am to show what is meant by the requirement. It is meant that Christians are bound not to conform to the world in the three following things. I mention only these three, not because there are not many other things in which conformity to the world is forbidden, but because these three classes are all that I have had time to examine tonight, and further, because these three are peculiarly necessary to be discussed at the present time. The three things are three departments of life, in which it is required that you be not conformed to this world. They are business, fashion, politics. In all these departments, it is required that Christians should not do as the world do. They should neither receive the maxims, nor adopt the principles, nor follow the practices of the world. Commentary. Before I get started on this, business, fashion, politics. I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to start this off, but I, I think that when the world, I mean, I'm very aware right now of James chapter 4. And in James chapter 4, it says that the world is basically anybody who's a friend of the world is an enemy of God. So if you're anti-Christian, right, in your attitude and sentiment, you're a worldly person. I mean, that seems to be what James chapter 4 teaches. And also, James chapter 4 seems to teach jealousy of other people and the things that they have, and competing with them and fighting with them over it. So in other words, keeping up with the Joneses, or materialistic jealousy and materialistic competition over money and possessions, seems to be the thing of the world. And so I would really, I mean, if you were just looking at James chapter 4, I would put the world in really into the category of materialism. But I think that he's trying to aim at that with him mentioning business first. Materialism is not to be confused with um, trying to have a strong work ethic, which is taught in Proverbs. Diligence and frugality leads to financial growth, right? Those things are taught in the book of Proverbs. Hard work plus being frugal and budgeting your money and saving leads to financial growth. This is a consistent teaching throughout Proverbs. But also, after you accumulate the financial growth, you're supposed to, as Wesley said in The Use of Money, gain all you can, make as much money as you can, save all you can, save as much money as you can, and then give all you can. And the reason why he said give all you can, and he was extreme on this point, is to avoid materialism. In other words, you have enough money, you're producing enough money to uh, live like a person that shows their money off. That's what I would call materialism. A person that likes to show their money off, to impress people. All right. You have enough money to do this. I mean, this is like a goal, but you don't show it off, right? You give all you can to the cause of God. And then of course there's in Proverbs where it says, there is a man who pretends to be rich yet has nothing. And then there is a man who pretends to be poor yet has great wealth. And that seems to be the second person who pretends to be poor but has great wealth is the person that Wesley and Proverbs and Solomon seems to aim at as kind of like the goal. It's like you have the ability to live like a millionaire, right? And show off and flaunt your wealth and be worldly, but you don't. right? God only knows how much money you got in your bank account, but no man needs to know that, right? So the concept of simplicity, simple living, is coupled with making as much money as a millionaire. Like you're making as much money as a millionaire, and yet you're living in a cottage or something, you know. And there's extremes that people can take in these areas, obviously, but one thing that I think that Finney is right to do is to start off with the business thing, because there's so much flaunting, gaudy wealth with this that it's worldly. It's worldly, of the physical world, of this world, not of the spirit world. It's not spirit world. Uh, it's not heavenly mindedness. It's earthly mindedness, to always be looking at things that you can touch and taste and see and feel and touch and feel, right? That's material, right? Materialism is that orientation of the heart that says, I'm going to ignore theology, prayer, and Bible and all heavenly mindedness and only focus on the natural things in life, right? Worldly is aka literally everything that is related to physical realities, to this world realities, earthly realities. I mean, worldliness could be called earthliness, right? Because it's a mindset that says, let's only think about the physical world, materialism, right? Okay. I just wanted to throw all that in there before we go off into Finney's take on this. 3. I am to mention, okay, wait, business, fashion, politics. In all these departments, it is required that Christians should not do as the world do. They should neither receive the maxims nor adopt the principles, nor follow the practices of the world. 3. I am to mention some reasons for the command. Be not conformed to this world. You are by no means to act on the same principles, nor from the same motives, nor pursue your object in the same manner as that the world do, either in the pursuits of business or of fashion or of politics. I shall examine these several departments separate. First, of business. 1. The first reason why we are not to be conformed to this world in business is that the principle of the world is that of supreme selfishness. This is true universally in the pursuit of business. The whole course of business in the world is governed and regulated by the maxims of supreme and unmixed selfishness. It is regulated without the least regard to the commands of God, or the glory of God, or the welfare of their fellow men. The maxims of business generally current among businessmen and the habits and usages of businessmen are all based upon supreme selfishness. Who does not know that in making bargains, the businessmen of the world consult their own interest and seek their own benefit and not the benefit of those they deal with? Who has ever heard of a worldly man of business making bargains and doing business for the benefit of those he dealt with? No, it is always for their own benefit. And are Christians to do so? They are required to act on the very opposite principle to this. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. They are required to copy the example of Jesus Christ. Did he ever make bargains for his own advantage? And may his followers adopt the principle of the world, a principle that contains in it the seeds of hell? If Christians are to do this, is it not the most visionary thing on earth to suppose the world is ever going to be converted to the gospel? Okay. 2. They are required not to conform to the world because conformity to the world is totally inconsistent with the love of God or man. The whole system recognizes only the love of self. Go through all the ranks of businessmen, from the man that sells candy on the sidewalk at the corner of the street to the greatest wholesale merchant or importer in the United States, and you will find that one maxim runs through the whole. to buy as cheap as you can and sell as dear as you can, to look out for number one, and to do always, as far as the rules of honesty will allow, all that will advance your own interests, let what will become of the interests of others. Ungodly men will not deny that these are the maxims on which business is done in the world. The man who pursues this course is universally regarded as doing business on business principles. Now, are these maxims consistent with holiness, with the love of God, or the love of man, with the spirit of the gospel, or the example of Jesus Christ? Can a man conform to the world in these principles and yet love God? Impossible. No two things can be more unlike. Then Christians are by no means to conform to the business maxims of the world. Okay, commentary. He's talking about Machiavellianism. He's talking about lying, cheating, and stealing. Capitalist concept of self-interest and competition, and greed as a motivation for hard work. Bernard Mandeville's Fable of the Bees, and Machiavelli's The Prince, all wrapped up into one. It's take advantage of people, do whatever you can to take advantage of people, look out for number one, step over whoever you can in business to promote yourself, take advantage of people, make sure that you come out ahead, who cares what happens to the other guy, right? This is the worldly way to approach business activity. And if anybody turns around and if anybody lives like that, as they pursue their career, and then they turn around and proclaim that the blessings of God are on their bank account, they're vile hypocrites, right? Book of Proverbs teaches a different set of business ethics. It does not teach self-interest and competition. It teaches fairness in just prices and just wages. It teaches hard work, never mind what happens to the other guy. You do you, focus on hard labor and diligence. And what are the other vices? Greed is a motivation for hard work. The Bible teaches that you should provide for your needs, but you shouldn't necessarily want to become a rich person, but you should want to provide for your family's needs. So what are the main vices? Self-interest, competition, already tackled those. Greed is a motivation for hard work. All right, and deception and cruelty. What does the Bible teach about that? Absolutely not. It says there's no deception allowed in business activity. You have to be completely honest in all that you do and fair, because the Lord hates and abominates an unfair scale. And cruelty. Cruelty? Are you kidding me? The golden rule is the traditional Christian business ethic. Do to others as you have them do to you. So, in other words, in all of your business activities, treat people with respect, work hard, work honest, and do not take advantage of people. Do not work like a devil and then turn around and say the blessing of God is on your business. Now, as I've said before, and I'll say it again probably, the honesty thing needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because when you're dealing with customers, especially in sales, they will oftentimes interrogate you like a cop does at a police station. And sometimes you can have a slip of the tongue and say things that you shouldn't have said in the business conversation. You might have disclosed too much information that was confidential, or you might have said something that was inaccurate or false by accident. All right. And Finney had already defined in one of his previous sermons that a lie is a true lie if it was done on purpose and fully knowledgeably, not by accident. So, you got to think about that. Lying, cheating, and stealing is not part of the Christian and biblical business ethic. The business ethic is to work hardly, to work fairly, diligence or frugality, okay, hard work plus budgeting and saving your money equals financial growth, and your actual job performance is done with an attitude of honesty and kindness and respect towards those you work with, either whether it's a coworker or a customer. And so that's basically, he hasn't gone that far, and maybe he will now confirm what I was just saying. I don't know. I haven't read the rest. But here he is. He's definitely preaching against Machiavellian, Wolf of Wall Street sort of business ethics, Wall Street, Gordon Gekko type business ethics is what he's saying. People that, shrewd businessman, they're just out to get people and take advantage of them and, not charge their workers, not charge their customers a fair price and, try to rip them off, and stuff like this. That's ungodly, dude. You can't preach no prosperity gospel with an ungodly attitude like that, right? God's not going to support that. All right, anyway, okay, here we go. So, 3. These maxims and the rules by which business is done in the world are directly opposite to the gospel of Jesus Christ and the spirit he exhibited, and the maxims he inculcated, and the rules which he enjoined that all his followers should obey, on pain of hell. What was the spirit Jesus Christ exemplified on earth? It was the spirit of self-denial, of benevolence, of sacrificing himself to do good to others. He exhibited the same spirit that God does, who enjoys his infinite happiness in going out of himself to gratify his benevolent heart in doing good to others. This is the religion of the gospel, to be like God, not only doing good, but enjoying it joyfully out of self to do good. This is the gospel maxim. It is more blessed to give than to receive. And again, look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. What says the businessman of the world? Look out for number 1. These very maxims were made by men who knew and cared no more for the gospel than the heathen do. Why should Christians conform to such maxims as these? 4. To conform to the world in the pursuits of business is a flat contradiction of the engagements that Christians make when they enter the church. What is the engagement that you make when you enter the church? It is not to renounce the world and live for God, and to be actuated by the Spirit of Jesus Christ. Whoa. I totally turned this around. Hold on. I'm going to redo this thing. Okay. Start from the top. What is the engagement that you make when you enter the church? Is it not to renounce the world and live for God, and to be actuated by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, and to possess supreme love to God, and to renounce self, and to give yourself to glorify God and do good to men? You profess not to love the world, its honors, or its riches. Around the communion table, with your hand on your broken body, on the broken body of your Savior, you avouch these to be your principles, and pledge yourself to live by these maxims. And then what do? Go away and follow maxims and rules gotten up by men, whose avowed principle is the love of the world, and whose avowed object is to get the world? Is this your way? Then, unless you repent, let me tell you, you will be damned. It is no more certain that any infidel or any profligate wretch will go to hell than that all such professing Christians will go there who conform to the world. They have double guilt. They are sworn before God to a different course, and when they pursue the business principles of the world, they show that they are perjured wretches. Dang. 5. Conformity to the world is such a manifest contradiction of the principles of the gospel that sinners, when they see it, do not and cannot understand from it the true nature and object of the gospel itself. How can they understand that the object of the gospel is to raise men above the love of the world and above the influence of the world and place them on higher ground to live on totally different principles? When they see professing Christians acting on the same principles with other men, how can they understand the true principles of the gospel, or know what it means by heavenly mindedness, self-denial, benevolence, and so on? 6. It is this spirit of conformity to the world that has already eaten out the love of God from the church. Show me a young convert while his heart is warm, and the love of God glows out from his lips. What does he care for the world? Call up his attention to it, point him to its riches, its pleasures, or its honors, and try to engage him in their pursuit, and he loathes the thought. But let him now go into business, and do business on the principles of the world 1 year, and you no longer find the love of God glowing in his heart, and his religion has become the religion of conscience, dry, meager, uninfluential, anything but the glowing love of God, moving him to acts of benevolence. I appeal to every man in his house. I appeal to every man in this house, and if my voice was loud enough, I would appeal to every professor of religion in this city, if it is not. And if anyone should say, "No, it is not so," I should regard it as proof that he never knew what it was to feel the glow of a convert's first love. 7. This conformity to the world in business is one of the greatest stumbling blocks in the way of the conversion of sinners. What do wicked men think when they see professing Christians with such professions on their lips and pretending to believe what the Bible teaches, and yet driving after the world as eager as anybody, making the best bargains and dealing as hard as the most worldly? What do they think? I can tell you what they say. They say, "I do not see, but these Christians do just as the rest of us do. They act on the same principles, look out as sharp for number one, drive as hard bargains, and get as high interest as anybody." And it must be said that these are not things of which the world accuse Christians slanderously. It is a notorious fact that most of the members of the church pursue the world as far as appears in the same spirit, by the same maxims, and to the same degree that the ungodly do who maintain a character for uprightness and humanity. The world say, "Look at the church. I don't see as they are any better than I am. They go to the full length that I do after the world." If professing Christians act on the same principles with worldly men, as the Lord liveth, they shall have the same reward. They are set down in God's book of remembrance as black hypocrites, pretending to be the friends of God while they love the world. For whoso loveth the world is the enemy of God. They profess to be governed by principles directly opposite to the world, and if they do the same things with the world, they are hypocrites. 8. Another reason for the requirement, "Be not conformed to this world," is the immense salutary and instantaneous influence it would have if everybody would do business on the principles of the gospel. Just turn the tables over and let Christians do business 1 year on gospel principles. It would shake the world. It would ring louder than thunder. Let the ungodly see professing Christians in every bargain, consulting the good of the person they are trading with, seeking not their own wealth, but every man another's wealth, living above the world, setting no value on the world any farther than it can be a means of glorifying God. What do you think would be the effect? What effect did it have in Jerusalem when the whole body of Christians gave up their business and turned out in a body to pursue the salvation of the world? They were only a few ignorant fishermen and a few humble women, but they turned the world upside down. Let the church live so now, and it would cover the world with confusion of face and overwhelm them with convictions of sin. Only let them see the church living above the world, in doing business on gospel principles, seeking not their own interests but the interests of their fellow men, and infidelity would hide its head, heresy would be driven from the church, and this charming, blessed spirit of love would go over the world like the waves of the sea. Commentary. Okay, now a dose of realism. We're living in the year 2024, not the year 1836. what does this mean? Well, Charles Finney is living in a time period that was before the Industrial Revolution. He's living in 1836. He's preaching in 1836, which means that 80%, according to Irvin Wiley's book, The Self-Made Man in America, 80% of the business world in the United States in Charles Finney's time while he's preaching this, 80% of the business world was self-employed. Self-employed, 80%. So he's speaking to tradesmen who are running family businesses with like mom and pop shops, mom, dads, and a son. You know, that's the companies, those are the businesses he's speaking to. And he's saying, a lot of you Presbyterian people, you come to church and you say you believe in the Bible, but you act like Machiavellians when you go back to your shops. And it's on you, you know. And so why don't you run your shops on gospel principles instead of being worldly like everybody else? Right. Now let's look at the year 2024. The reality is 90% of the business world is not self-employed. 90% of the business world is employed by giant corporations, is employed by somebody else, or what some have pejoratively called wage slaves. In other words, you're under another man's power, you're slaves to another master. That's a tricky situation when you're trying to take, you know, there's only, in other words, today in the United States, only 10%, something like 10%, give or take one digit, only 10% of the United States is self-employed. So Finney was mainly speaking to self-employed people when he was saying these things. And, you know, if you're self-employed, aka if you work at home, if you're a remote worker, and you have maybe a side hustle, I would consider you to be self-employed. You know, you might have a W-2 job, but you might have a side hustle, and you're working at home. I would consider you to be self-employed. And, you know, this totally applies to people like that. You know, well, what about all those other people out there? Like the majority of people out there. Well, I would, it doesn't mean that it's okay to act like a Machiavellian. You know, it's not okay to lie, cheat, and steal. It's not okay to be dishonest. It's not okay to take advantage of people. But the situation is a little bit different, and personal human responsibility, while it exists, is a little bit forced in the economic situations that we're in today. If you're not self-employed and you're an employee, W-2 employee, you have to conform. Here's the ethical quandary for Christians. You kind of have to conform to the culture of the business you're employed at if you're an employee. So if there's a profuse amount of profanity in that business culture, if you never give way to a cuss word every once in a while, they're going to be like, dude, what's wrong with you? And it's going to become really, really hard for you to fit in. So there's a lot of peer pressure to be ungodly when you're in an employee situation. It just is. And it really does conflict with the gospel and create a sort of compartmentalization of your Christian life and a sort of duplicitous hypocrisy, which is not your fault. It's not your fault if that's the situation you find yourself in. It's just the result of we live after the Industrial Revolution and corporate America. I'm talking about corporate America is what I'm talking about. You know, before the Industrial Revolution, it was mom and pop shops all over the place. Like 80% of the economy was like this. After the Industrial Revolution, especially after the year 1950, corporate America. 80% is corporate America. So how do you apply biblical Proverbs ethics, Charles Finney type ethics to business? Well, to me, you know, and this is why I believe biblical sanctification is progressive. In other words, it's like an upward diagonal trend. You have to take steps to perfect your life, to perfect your moral life. That it's a growing process. You have to chip away at it. You have to make process improvements on your sanctification. I believe that. That's why we're not saved by sanctification. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. True, but holiness is progressive, right? So if that's the case, I believe self-employment has to fit into the picture eventually. That should be, when you think of a verse like going on to perfection, not as though we have already attained, da 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 da. I really truly believe self-employment for some people fits into that, because when you're self-employed, you can follow your own culture of business ethics, and that's where the Bible can come in. You can actually live by biblical business ethics, biblical business culture as you are self-employed, and not have to feel like you have to conform to a worldly business culture, which is being set by your manager, essentially. Now, if you're a slave, right? If you're a slave and you have a master, what does the Bible say about that? It says, work like a slave as unto the Lord for your master. And if you are what they call a wage slave, then let's be honest, you are a slave. But it's always God's desire to set people free from slavery. In the Exodus, God sent Moses to deliver the slaves from their taskmasters. And just because slavery existed as an institution in the first century, just like slavery existed in the 1800s, doesn't mean God wants people, that it's God's will for people to be in slavery. So, it seems to me that deliverance from economic slavery, and I would consider the wage slave in corporate America to be a type of slave, because he's not really truly independent. He's not really truly in control of his economic life. The man who is self-employed has much more control over his economic life and doesn't have to feel sullied and, besotted by the sinfulness of his worldly business culture that he goes to every single day. He can actually work on his sanctification, But back to Charles Finney's point, Charles Finney is preaching really not to corporate America, because corporate America didn't exist in Charles Finney's time. Charles Finney is preaching at people who are self-employed and saying, if you're a Christian self-employed guy with a fish logo on your truck, if you're a Christian self-employed guy with a fish logo on your truck and you are lying, cheating, and stealing, and if you're working hard but you're being greedy and you think that you're just so great, you're going to hell. In fact, what he says is you are doubly guilty, because the worldly people who act like that, they don't even know about the gospel, but you do. Here you do. You know about the gospel, you know about the Bible, and you're still acting like that? You're still being self-interested, competitive, deceptive, cruel, greedy? Dude, that's not a situation to be in. So I guess the ultimate thing to be considering when you're looking at biblical business ethics is free will. Free will. Show yourself grace. If you're in a non-free will scenario, right? If you're working in a corporation and there's people over you and stuff, and you feel like the business control culture is like the worldly business culture is literally peer pressuring you every single day, and there's not much free choice that you have in the matter, God knows that and God sees that. At the same token, the Bible says there is not one temptation that is not common to man, and the Lord will provide you a way of escape so that you may be able to bear it. Some worldly business cultures are so worldly that they have slutty women all over them. I mean, I can't think of a more decent word to use. I would, but slutty women. I mean, is there a cleaner word? Immodest women, maybe? I mean, no, I think slutty works. There are slutty women in some business offices. I mean, to the point where, I mean, the things that they do, flashing. I mean, I heard, I think I wasn't present. Well, I mean, I wasn't there, but I believe I was in a sales office where a girl actually flashed a guy, but I didn't see it. Actually flashed him. That is slutty. There's no other word for it. Joseph ran away from Potiphar's wife. I'm leaving this office, right? So much monkey business in some of these places. In some places they're better than others. All right, so that's my final comments on that. All right. Secondly, of fashions. Why are Christians required not to follow the fashions of the world? 1, because it is directly at war with the spirit of the gospel and is minding earthly things. What is minding earthly things if it is not to follow the fashions of the world, that like a tide are continually setting to and fro, and fluctuating in their forms, and keeping the world continually changing? There are many men of large business in the world, and men of wealth, who think they care nothing for the fashions. They are occupied with something else, and they trust the fashions altogether with their tailor, taking it for granted that he will make all right. But mind, if he should make a garment unfashionable, you would see that they do care about the fashions, and they never would employ that tailor again. Still, at present their thoughts are not much on the fashions. They have a higher object in view, and they think it beneath the dignity of a minister to preach about fashions. They overlook the fact that with the greater part of mankind, fashion is everything. The greater part of the community are not rich, and never expect to be, but they look to the world to enable them to make a respectable appearance, and to bring up their families in a respectable manner. That is, to follow the fashions. 9/10 of the population never look at anything higher than to do as the world does or to follow the fashions. For this they strain every nerve, and this is what they set their hearts on and what they live for. The merchant and the rich man deceives himself, therefore, if he supposes that fashion is a little thing. The great body of the people mind this. Their minds are set upon it, and the thing which they look for in life is to have their dress, equipage, furniture, and so on, like other people, in the fashion, or respectable, as they call it. 2, to conform to the world is contrary to their profession. When people join the church, they profess to give up the spirit that gives rise to fashions. They profess to renounce the pomps and vanities of the world, to repent of their pride, to follow the meek and lowly Savior, to live for God. And now what do? You often see professors of religion go to the extreme of fashion. Nothing will satisfy them that is not in the height of fashion. And the Christian female dressmaker, who is conscientiously opposed to following the fashions, cannot get her bread. She cannot get employment even among professing Christian ladies, unless she follows the fashions in all their countless changes. God knows it so, and they must give up their business if their conscience will not permit them to follow the changes of fashion. 3. This conformity is a broad and complete approval of the spirit of the world. What is it that lies at the bottom of all this shifting scenery? What is the cause that produces all this gaudy show and dash and display? It is the love of applause, and when Christians follow the changes of fashion, they pronounce all this innocent. All this waste of money, and time and thought, all this feeding and cherishing of vanity and the love of applause, the church sets her seal to when she conforms to the world. 4. Nay, further, another reason is that following the fashions of the world, professing Christians show that they do in fact love the world. They show it by their conduct, just as the ungodly show it by the same conduct. As they act alike, they give evidence that they are actuated by one principle, the love of fashion. 5. When Christian professors do this, they show most clearly that they love the praise of men. It is evident that they love admiration and flattery, just as sinners do. Is not this inconsistent with Christian principle, to go right into the very things that are set up by the pride and fashion and lust of the ungodly? 6. Conforming to the world and fashion, you show that you do not hold yourself accountable to God for the manner in which you lay out money. You practically disown your stewardship of the money that is in your possession. By laying out money to gratify your own vanity and lust, you take off the keen edge of that truth which ought to cut that sinner in two, which is living to himself. It is practically denying that the earth is the Lord's, with the cattle on 1,000 hills, and all to be employed for his glory. 7. You show that reputation is your idol. When the cry comes to your ears on every wind, from the ignorant and the lost of all nations, come over and help us, come over and help us, and every week brings some call to send the gospel, to send tracts and Bibles and missionaries to those who are perishing for lack of knowledge. If you choose to expend money in following the fashions, it is demonstration that reputation is your idol. Suppose now, for the sake of argument, that it is not prohibited in the Word of God to follow the fashions, and that professing Christians, if they will, may innocently follow the fashions. I deny that it is innocent, but suppose it were. Does not the fact that they do follow them, when there are such calls for money and time and thought, and labor to save souls, prove conclusively that they do not love God nor the souls of men? Take the case of a woman whose husband is in slavery, and she is trying to raise money enough for his redemption. There she is, toiling and saving, rising up early and sitting up late, and eating the bread of carefulness because her husband, the father of her children, the friend of her youth, is in slavery. Go now to that woman and tell her that it is innocent for her to follow the fashions and dress and display like her neighbors. Will she do it? Why not? She does not desire to do it. She will scarcely buy a pair of shoes for her feet. She grudges almost the bread she eats. So intent is she on her great object. Now suppose a person loved God and the souls of men and the kingdom of Christ. Does he need an express prohibition from God to prevent him from spending his money and his life in following the fashion? No, indeed. He will rather need a positive injunction to take what is needful for his own comfort and the support of his own life. Take the case of Timothy. Did he need a prohibition to prevent him from indulging in the use of wine? So far from it. He was so cautious that it required an express injunction from God to make him drink a little as a medicine. Although he was sick, he would not drink it till he had the word of God for it. He saw the evils of it so clearly. Now show me a man or woman, I care not what their professions are, that follows the fashions of the world, and I will show you what spirit they are of. Now do not ask me why Abraham and David and Solomon, who were so rich, did not lay out their money in spreading the kingdom of God. Tell me, did they enjoy the light that professors now enjoy? Did they even know so much as this, that the world can be converted, as Christians now see clearly that it can? But suppose it were as allowable in you as it was in Abraham or David to be rich, and to lay out the property you possess in display, in pomp and fashion. Suppose it were perfectly innocent, who that loves the Lord Jesus Christ would wish to lay out money in fashion, when they could lay it out to gratify the all-absorbing passion to do good to the souls of men. 8. By conforming to the world in fashion, you show that you differ not at all from ungodly sinners. Ungodly sinners say, I don't see but that these Christian men and women love to follow the fashions as well as I do. Who does not know that this leads many to infidelity? 9. By following the fashions, you are tempting God to give you up to a worldly spirit. There are many now that have followed the world and followed the fashions, till God seems to have given them over to the devil for the destruction of the flesh. They have little or no religious feeling, no spirit of prayer, no zeal for the glory of God or the conversion of sinners. The Holy Spirit seems to have withdrawn from them. 10. You tempt the church to follow the fashions. Where the principal members, the elders and leaders in the church, and their wives and families, where the principal members, where they do this, are fashionable Christians, they drag the whole church along with them into the train of fashion, and everyone apes them as far as they can, down to the lowest servant. Only let a rich Christian lady come out to the house of God in full fashion, and the whole church are set agog to follow as far as they can, and it is a chance if they do not run in debt to do it. You tempt yourself to pride and folly in a worldly spirit. Suppose a man that had been intemperate and was reformed should go and surround himself with wine and brandy and every seductive liquor, keeping the provocatives of appetite always under his eye, and from time to time tasting a little. Does he not tempt himself? Now see that woman that has been brought up in the spirit of pride and show, and that has been reformed, and has professed to abandon them all. Let her keep these trappings, and continue to follow the fashions, and pride will drag her backwards as sure as he lives. She tempts herself to sin and folly. 12. You are tempting the world. You are setting the world into a more fierce and hot pursuit of these things, the very things that the world love, and that they are sure to have scruples about their being right. Professing Christians fall in with and follow, and thus tempt the world to continue in the pursuit of what will destroy their souls in hell. 13. By following the fashions, you are tempting the devil to tempt you. When you follow the fashions, you open your heart to him. You keep it from him. You keep it for him, empty, swept, and garnished. Every woman that suffers herself to follow the fashions may rely upon it. She is helping Satan to tempt her to pride and sin. 14. You lay a great stumbling block before the greatest part of mankind. There are a few persons who are pursuing greater objects than fashion. They are engaged in the scramble for political power, or they are eager for literary distinction, or they are striving for wealth, and they do not know that their hearts are set on fashion at all. They are following selfishness on a larger scale, but the great mass of the community are influenced mostly by these fluctuating fashions. To this class of persons it is a great and more sore stumbling block when they see professing Christians just as prompt and as eager to follow the changing of fashion as themselves. They see and say, what does their profession amount to when they follow the fashions as much as anybody? Or, certainly it is right to follow the fashions, for see, the professing Christians do it as much as we. 15. Another reason why professing Christians are required not to be conformed to the world in fashion is the great influence their disregarding fashion would have on the world. If professing Christians would show their contempt for these things and not pretend to follow them or regard them, how it would shame the world and convince the world that they were living for another object, for God and for eternity. How irresistible it would be. What an overwhelming testimony in favor of our religion. Even the apparent renunciation of the world by many orders of monks has doubtless done more than anything else to put down the opposition to their religion and give it currency and influence in the world. Now suppose all this was hearty and sincere, and coupled with all that is consistent and lovely in Christian character, and all that is zealous and bold and labors for the conversion of the world from sin to holiness. What an influence it would have! What thunders it would pour into the ears of the world, to wake them up to follow after God. Commentary. Interesting thoughts. Kind of on the alarmist side, kind of extreme. At the same time, not entirely worth ignoring. You know, he brings up some very good points, and but quotes absolutely no Bible verses whatsoever to support his views. So let's do that now. Because he brings up some valid points, I do want to support what he's saying. Bible verses about clothes. Bible verses about clothes. There are some Bible verses about clothes, and I will quote some. 1 Timothy 2, 9-10. Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness, with good works. Deuteronomy 22:5. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. What else? Oh, this is an interesting one. Genesis 3:21. The Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skins and clothed them. 1 Peter 3:3-4. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. 1 Peter 3:3 again. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear. Matthew 6:25, Jesus said, Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? And one of the verses that came to my mind was Jesus' reference to John the Baptist. Matthew 3:4, John wore a garment of camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locusts and wild honey. Okay. One of the things that Jesus said about John the Baptist was in Matthew chapter 11. In Matthew chapter 11, Jesus refers to John the Baptist, and Jesus talks about, okay, so John the Baptist is in prison, and Jesus speaks to his disciples about him. Matthew 11:7 to 9. Oh, okay, Matthew 11:7 to 11. Jesus said, as John's disciples were leaving, John the Baptist's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No, those who wear fine clothes are in king's palaces. Then what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you. Truly I tell you, among those born of women there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist, yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. In other words, he's not more special than the other one who's saved. Okay, so a man dressed in fine clothes, a prophet, right? Jesus associates John the Baptist as basically the greatest prophet who had lived up until him. And he did not wear fine clothes. He did not live in luxury like the kings, right? Why does he make this point? Why does Jesus make this distinction between the prophet who despises luxurious clothing, right? He wore a garment of camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist. Matthew 3:4. Matthew 6:25, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, the body more than clothing? It's about priorities. It's about your priorities. Jesus wants us to put heavenly mindedness as our priority, not earthly mindedness. And the clothes that you wear, mall clothes, Abercrombie and Fitch, preppy clothes. Keeping up with the Joneses about your preppy clothes. He's saying life is more important, spiritual life is more important than those things. And, if I wish Charles Finney quoted the Bible more often, I really do, but I think that some of this has to do with the fact that he kind of just spoke off the top of his head. But this is essentially what he was getting at. Materialism says that earthly things are more important than spiritual things. That's where we need to stick that. Thirdly, in politics, I will show why professing Christians are required not to be conformed to the world in politics. 1. Because the politics of the world are perfectly dishonest. Who does not know this? Who does not know that it is the proposed policy of every party to cover up the defects of their own candidate and the good qualities of the opposing candidate? And is not this dishonest? Every party holds up its candidate as a piece of perfection and then aims to ride himself into office by any means, fair or foul. No man can be an honest man that is committed to a party, to go with them, let them do what they may. And can a Christian do it and keep a conscience void of offense? 2. To conform to the world in politics is to tempt God. By following with the world in politics, Christians are guilty of setting up rulers over them by their own vote, who do not fear nor love God, and who set the law of God at defiance, break the Sabbath, and gamble, and commit adultery, and fight duels, and swear profanely, and leave the laws unexecuted at their pleasure, and that care not for the weal or woe of their country, so long as they can keep their office. I say Christians do this, for it is plain that where parties are divided, as they are in this country, there are Christians enough to turn the scale in any election. Now let Christians take the ground that they will not vote for a dishonest man, or a Sabbath breaker, or a gambler, or whoremonger, or duelist for any office, and no party could ever nominate such a character with any hope of success. But on the present system, where men will let the laws go unexecuted and give full swing to mobs, or lynch murders, or robbing the mails, or anything else, so they can run in their own candidate who will give them the offices, any man is a dishonest man that will do it, because be he a professor or a non-professor. And can a Christian do this and be blameless? 3. By engaging with the world in politics, Christians grieve the Spirit of God. Ask any Christian politician if he ever carried the Spirit of God with him into a political campaign. Never. I would by no means be understood to say that Christians should refuse to vote and to exercise their lawful influence in public affairs, but they ought not to follow a party. 4. By following the present course of politics, you are contributing your aid to undermine all government and order in the land. Who does not know that this great nation now rocks and reels because the laws are broken and trampled underfoot, and the executive power refuses or dare not act? Either the magistrate does not wish to put down disorder, or he temporizes and lets the devil rule. And so it is in all parts of the country and all parties. And can a Christian be consistent with his profession and vote for such men to office? 5. You lay a stumbling block in the way of sinners. What do sinners think when they see professing Christians acting with them in their political measures, which they themselves know to be dishonest and corrupt? They say, "We understand what we are about. We are after office. We are determined to carry our party into power. We are pursuing our own interest. But these Christians profess to live for another and a higher end. And yet here they come and join with us as eager for the loaves and fishes as the rest of us. What greater stumbling block can they have?" Commentary. You know, why are Christians so involved in politics in America? Well, mainly because the Puritans, when in the 1600s, before the American Revolution with George Washington and Thomas Jefferson in 1776, we had a 100-year period before the American Revolution in this country that was completely Puritan. The government was Puritan for 100 years. A Bible Commonwealth is what they called their system of government. They called it a Bible Commonwealth, and it was centered around not Washington, D.C., it was centered around Boston, Massachusetts. And then the American Revolution started and all that changed. But so that's why we have this element of Bible-believing Christians that try to influence political parties. That's why we've had this element from the beginning. It's a carryover from the Puritans in Boston. But he's saying here in 1836, it was 200 years after this Puritanism, this Puritan government thing, it's gotten so secularized to the point where it's a waste of time, is what he's saying, and that it has a worldly influence on the personal holiness of Christians in this new country that we have, this new secularized country that we have. And there's so much dishonest politicians. It's just to pressure Bible believers to vote in a secularized country with secularized parties debating with one another is practically a waste of time. Now, obviously, when it comes to certain political causes, right, to vote for the advancement of said political causes is another issue. Like, for example, Charles Finney was really big on temperance, on prohibition of alcohol. And he would have supported the idea of voting to support laws like that. Charles Finney was hardcore against slavery. He was for abolition. He would have supported voting for Abraham Lincoln if he knew full well, that abolition was going to happen. And he was friends with Abraham Lincoln at one point. But he was also kind of apolitical because, the priority is not voting. The priority is obeying the Bible. And so oftentimes, you have Jesus looking at Herod and he says, "That fox." And you look at every single politician, Democrat, Republican, you name it, there's a foxiness to it, a shrewdness, a kind of a deception and cruelty and taking advantage of one another on both sides involved. And it doesn't operate on Christian principles. He's absolutely right to say that. And then one last thing, Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were so, my servants would fight." Okay. 6. You prove to the ungodly that professing Christians are actuated by the same spirit as themselves. Who can wonder that the world is incredulous as to the reality of religion? If they do not look for themselves into the scriptures and there learn what religion is, if they are governed by the rules of evidence from what they see in the lives of professing Christians, they ought to be incredulous. They ought to infer, so far as this evidence goes, that professors of religion do not themselves believe in it. It is the fact. I doubt myself whether the great mass of professors believe the Bible. 7. They show, so far as their evidence can go, that there is no change of heart. What is it? Is it going to the communion table once in a month or two, and sometimes to prayer meeting? Is that a change of heart, when they are just as eager in the scramble for office as any others. The world must be fools to believe in a change of heart on such evidence. 8. Christians ought to cease from conformity to the world in politics, from the influence which such a course would have on the world. Suppose Christians were to act perfectly conscientious and consistent in this matter, and to say, we will not vote for any man to office unless he fears God and will rule the people in righteousness. Ungodly men would not set men as candidates who themselves set the laws at defiance. No, every candidate would be obliged to show that he was prepared to act from higher motives, and that he would lay himself out to make the country prosperous and to promote virtue and to put down vice and oppression and disorder, and to do all he can to make the people happy and holy. It would shame the dishonest politicians to show that the love of God and man is the motive that Christians have in view, and a blessed influence would go over the land like a wave. Commentary. Yeah, so basically Finney's saying you shouldn't vote for politicians wholesale like so many Christians do, where they say, I always vote the Republican ticket. Meanwhile, there's strip clubs in the country. Meanwhile, pornography is in the country. Meanwhile, Nevada legalizes prostitution. Meanwhile, bars exist all over this country where people are being wasted and driving home drunk. Meanwhile, Hollywood is unregulated, unlike it used to be by the League of Decency. Catholic League of Decency actually used to regulate movies that were produced. That's why all those black and white movies are so clean. Meanwhile, there's, just so many sins in this country. Homosexuality runs rampant. Abortion finally got outlawed, but still it's not all the way. There's just so many things, and these people are still politicking. And Christians are like, I vote the Republican ticket. I vote the Democrat ticket. And there's all these vices in the land. And if they were just by fiat to, use the power of law and outlaw all of these vices everywhere, right? That's basically what he's saying, And his main two political ethical issues are prohibition and abolition of slaves. Prohibition of alcohol and abolition of slaves. Freedom of slaves. But he's saying that so many of these politicians in his time could just really care less. And so why could you be a Christian in the 1800s and be like, I vote wholesale for all these guys that don't free the slaves and don't outlaw liquor? 4. I am to answer some objections that are made against the principles here advanced. 1. In regard to business. Objection. If we do not transact business on the same principles on which ungodly men do it, we cannot compete with them, and all the business of the world will fall into the hands of the ungodly. If we pursue our own business for the good of others, if we buy and sell on the principle of not seeking our own wealth, but the wealth of those we do business with, we cannot sustain a competition with worldly men, and they will get all the business. Let them have it then. You can support yourself by your industry and in some humbler calling, and let worldly men do all the business. Commentary. And basically, he's saying ill-gotten gain versus well-gotten gain. Like, if you can't make money in an honest way, then don't make money at all, is what he's saying. That's exactly what he's saying. Objection. But then, how should we get money to spread the gospel? A holy church that would act on the principles of the gospel would spread the gospel faster than all the money that ever was in New York or that ever will be. Give me a holy church that would live above the world, and the work of salvation would roll on faster than with all the money in Christendom. Objection. But we must spend a great deal of money to bring forward an educated ministry. If we had a holy ministry, it would be far more important than an educated ministry. If the ministry were holy enough, they would do without so much education. God forbid that I should undervalue an educated ministry. Let ministers be educated as well as they can, the more the better. if they are only holy enough, but it is all a farce to suppose that a literary ministry can convert the world. Let the ministry have the spirit of prayer. Let the baptism of the Holy Ghost be upon them, and they will spread the gospel. Only let Christians live as they ought, and the church would shake the world. If Christians in New York would do it, the report would soon fill every ship that leaves the port, and waft the news on every wind, till the earth was full of excitement and inquiry, and conversions would multiply like the drops of morning dew. Suppose you were to give up your business, and devote yourselves entirely to the work of extending the gospel. The church once did so, and you will know what followed. When that little band in Jerusalem gave up their business and spent their time in the work of God, salvation spread like a wave. And I believe if the whole Christian church were to turn right out and convert the world, it would be done in a very short time. And further, the fact is that you would not be required to give up your business. If Christians would do business in the spirit of the gospel, they would soon engross the business of the world. Only let the world see that if they go to a Christian to do business, he will not only deal honestly, but benevolently, that he will actually consult the interest of the person he deals with as if it were his own interest. And who would deal with anybody else? What merchant would go to an ungodly man to trade, who he knew would try to get the advantage of him and cheat him, while he knew that there were Christian merchants to deal with that would consult his interests as much as they do their own? Indeed, it is a known fact that there are now Christian merchants in this city who regulate the prices of the articles they deal in. Merchants come in from the country and inquire around to see how they can buy goods, and then go to these men to know exactly what articles are worth at a fair price and govern themselves accordingly. The advantage then is all on one side. The church can make it for the interest of the ungodly to do business on right principles. The church can regulate the business of the world, and woe to them if they do not. 2. In regard to fashion. Objection. Is it best for Christians to be singular? Certainly, Christians are bound to be singular. They are called to be a peculiar people, that is, a singular people, essentially different from the rest of mankind. To maintain that we are not to be singular is the same as to maintain that we are to be conformed to the world. Be not singular, that is, be like the world. In other words, be ye conformed to the world. This is the direct opposite to the command in the text. But the question now regards fashion, in dress, equipage, and so on. And here I will confess that I was formerly myself in error. I believed and I taught that the best way for Christians to pursue was to dress so as to not be noticed, to follow the fashions and changes so as to not appear singular, and that nobody would be led to think of their being different from others in these particulars. But I have seen my error, and now wonder greatly at my former blindness. It is your duty to dress so plain as to show to the world that you place no sort of reliance in the things of fashion, and set no value at all on them, but despise and neglect them altogether. But unless you are singular, unless you separate yourselves from the fashions of the world, you show that you do value them. There is no way in which you can bear a proper testimony by your lives against the fashions of the world but by dressing plain. I do not mean that you should study singularity, but that you should consult convenience and economy, although it may be singular. Objection. But if we dress plain, the attention of people will be taken with it. The reason of it is this: so few do it that it is a novelty, and everybody stares when they see a professing Christian so strict as to regard the fashions. Let them all do it, and the only thing you show by it is that you are a Christian and do not wish to be confounded with the ungodly. Would it not tell on the pride of the world if all the Christians in it were united in bearing a practical testimony against its vain show? Commentary. So basically, what he's saying is wear a prairie dress. That's what he's saying. You know, different holiness churches and different Pentecostal churches and different independent fundamental Baptist churches, women do this today. Not all of them, but the conservative ones do. They wear prairie dresses. That's the only thing they do. That's their way of living out that, not conforming to that's their way of living it out. Of the ethic of Jesus and Peter and Paul to not wear gaudy apparel, to set their mind on heavenly things, not earthly things like clothing. And I mean, suppose a lot of these girls and women that wear these holiness dresses before they were converted, maybe the only thing they did was go to the mall and wear Abercrombie and Fitch clothes, and so their way of living for Christ is now to wear a prairie dress. I mean, if that works for them, more power to them, because it gets their eyes off of the world, But but there's a variety of ways to dress plainly. You don't have to make it prairie dress only, like some of these people do. And I agree. I mean, the Puritans way back, hundreds of years back, used to follow the same rule. The Quakers were the worst, though. I mean, they were the worst ones at this thing. They would only wear black. The Amish are the same way. They only wear black. It's just as plain as can be, right? And that's not really healthy. I mean, do you really imagine that the Proverbs 31 woman who's making clothing, right, is only wearing black? No, probably not. But at the same time, luxury is probably not part of the picture either. Okay. Objection. But in this way you carry religion too far away from the multitude. It is better not to set up an artificial distinction between the church and the world. The direct reverse of this is true. The nearer you bring the church to the world, the more you annihilate the reasons that ought to stand out in view of the world for their changing sides and coming over to the church, unless you go right out from them, and show that you are not of them in any respect, and carry the church so far as to have a broad interval between saints and sinners. How can you make the ungodly feel that so great a change is necessary? Commentary, bathing suits. You might think this is extreme, but and he's not talking about it here. He's talking about everyday clothing. But think about it. If you give no thought to this subject whatsoever, then you will give no thought to the subject of bathing suits. And here we're thinking about something that is more than just showing off the pride of your wealth with gaudy apparel. And bathing suits is more of a lust of the heart and a lust of adultery of the heart type issue, which more directly goes against, if the clothing thing could be related to the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, thy neighbor's clothing. The bathing suit issue, I would have to say, where's bathing suits in the Bible? Where's their support for that, right? Where's their support for people like sunbathing on the beach in the Bible? We have a lot of things in our culture that we just accept on face value and never hold them up to the authority of the Word of God. And this is one of them. Public swimming at pools and beaches and lakes and oceans and water parks. We never hold this up to the Word of God and ask ourselves, is this biblical? But think about it. Where is there bathing suits in the Bible? Where is there a quote-unquote modest one-piece bathing suit in the Bible? Baywatch babes running around in the Bible. And where is there bikinis in the Bible? Either. Where is this? Where is this boating culture where people are just, got all these like 90% naked women on their boats and they're just having a good time on their boat in the Bible? The closest thing that I can think of is this one time I think it's in the Gospel of John. And Peter was out fishing with some of the disciples, and the resurrected Jesus comes walking on the beach, and and Peter is in like a Mowgli thing. He's in like this Mowgli, underwear type thing, and he's about to go out and he says, "It's the Lord." He's about to go out and see the Lord, and then all of a sudden he becomes self-conscious because he's wearing this Mowgli underwear type thing, right? And then he puts a robe on and jumps in the water with his robe on to go and see the Lord. That's the closest thing I can think of in the Bible right there to that. So, I mean, think about that. Um, one last thing. I think Pentecostal women in like the 1920s and 1930s used to wear bathing suits that had like clothing on them. Uh, like dresses, they actually kind of looked like dresses or skirts or something. Anyway, I'm just going to stop right there. Uh, okay. Objection. But this change which is necessary is a change of heart. True, but will not a change of heart produce a change of life? In other words, if you really change your attitude towards clothing, will that not also change the clothing that you wear? Right. Objection. You will throw obstacles in the way of persons becoming Christians. Many respectable people will become disgusted with religion, and if they cannot be allowed to dress and be Christians, they will take the world altogether. This is just about as reasonable as it would be for a temperance man to think he must get drunk now and then to avoid disgusting the intemperate, and to retain his influence over them. The truth is that persons ought to know and ought to see in the lives of professing Christians that if they embrace religion, they must be weaned from the world, and must give up the love of the world and its pride and show and folly, and live a holy life in watchfulness and self-denial and active benevolence. Objection. Is it not better for us to disregard this altogether, and not pay any attention to such little things, and let them take their course? Let the milliner and mantua maker do as they please, and follow the usages of society in which we live, and the circle in which we move? Is this the way to show contempt for the fashions of the world? Do people ordinarily take this course of showing contempt for a thing to practice it? Why, the way to show your abhorrence of the world is to follow along in the customs and the fashions of the world? Precious reasoning this. Objection. No matter how we dress, if our hearts are right. Your heart right? Then your heart may be right when your conduct is all wrong? Just as well might the profane swearer say, no matter what words I speak, if my heart is right. No, your heart is not right, unless your conduct is right. What is outward conduct but the acting out of the heart? If your heart was right, you would not wish to follow the fashions of the world. Commentary. So here he's basically saying, people who get Oakley glasses and wear Abercrombie and Fitch and spend, thousands of dollars on their wardrobe, a year, are basically and only wear the finest clothing, right, and have the most expensive shoes. These people, if they say, yeah, but in my heart, I love Jesus in my heart, if my heart's right, he's like, no. He's like, no, you're kidding yourself. That's what he's saying. Objection. What is the standard of dress? I do not see the use of all your preaching and laying down rules about plain dress unless you give us a standard. This is a mighty stumbling block with many, but to my mind the matter is extremely simple. The whole can be comprised in two simple rules. One is, be sure in all your equipage and dress and furniture to show that you have no fellowship with the designs and principles of those who are aiming to set off themselves and to gain the applause of men. The other is, let economy be first consulted and then convenience. Follow Christian economy. That is, save all you can for Christ's service, and then let things be as convenient as Christian economy will admit. Commentary. I like how he said, save all you can. That is a John Wesley expression. from John Wesley's sermon, The Use of Money. Save all you can. And so he is following suit with John Wesley on this. John Wesley wrote a pamphlet called On Dress or Of Dress, where he preached the same thing. And he believes that going to the mall for your clothes is a massive waste of money. A massive waste of money. Do not buy mall clothes, is generally the gist that Wesley and Finney don't. It's better to give the surplus of that to missions or something. If Wesley and Finney were around today, they would most likely be getting their clothes from Walmart or similar stores. They would not be going to the mall to buy the most expensive brands. No, they would be actually sermonizing against that. Is what they would be doing. Objection. Would you have us all turn Quakers and put on their plain dress? Who does not know that the plain dress of the Quakers has won for them the respect of all the thinking part of the ungodly in the community? Now, if they had coupled with this the zeal for God, and the weanedness from the world, and the contempt for riches, and the self-denying labor for the conversion of sinners to Christ, which the gospel enjoins, and the clear views of the plan of salvation which the gospel inculcates, they would long since have converted the world. And if all Christians would imitate them in their plain dress, I do not mean the precise cut and fashion of their dress, but in a plain dress, throwing contempt upon the fashions of the world, who can doubt that the conversion of the world would hasten on apace? Objection. Would you make us all into Methodists? Who does not know that the Methodists, when they were noted for their plain dress, and for renouncing the fashions and show of the world, used to have power with God in prayer, in that they had the universal respect of the world as sincere Christians? And who does not know that since they have laid aside this peculiarity, I'm just going to stop right there. Peculiarity. Oh man, I don't know how to pronounce it. They have laid it aside. Okay, it's 1836. They've laid it aside. They've given up on the holiness dress. Okay. And conform to the world in dress and other things, and seem to be trying to lift themselves up as a denomination and gain influence with the world. They are losing the power of prayer. Would to God they had never thrown down this wall. It was one of the leading excellences of Wesley's system to have his followers distinguished from others by a plain dress. Objection. We may be proud of a plain dress as well as of a fashionable dress. The Quakers are as proud as we are. So may any good thing be abused. But that is no reason why it should not be used, if it can be shown to be good. I put it back to the objector. Is that any reason why a Christian female, who fears God and loves the souls of men, should neglect the means which may make an impression that she is separated from the world and pour contempt on the fashions of the ungodly, in which they are dancing their way to hell? Commentary. Why are ungodly women dancing their way to hell by the clothes that they put on? Well, let's think, the 1800s. There's two things that come to my mind. And all you got to do is watch a couple episodes of Little House on the Prairie to get a sense of this. Number one, worldly women in those times tend to wear very flamboyant headdresses. I mean, they looked like a peacock, and it was very ridiculous looking and attention getting. But the second most worldly thing that women dressed like back then, and the same was true in the 1700s as well, is that when they went to balls, their chests were falling out of their dress. And that has a double damnation attached to it. Okay, so when he says dancing their way to hell, right, he's talking about their dancing clothes and literally falling out of their dress and the way they dressed, all right? Need I say more? No. We all know what I'm talking about here. All right. Objection. This is a small thing and ought not to take up so much of a minister's time in the pulpit. This is an objection often heard from worldly professors. But the minister that fears God will not be deterred by it. He will pursue the subject until such professing Christians are cut off from their conformity to the world or cut off from the church. It is not merely the dress as dress, but it is the conformity to the world in dress and fashion that is the great stumbling block in the way of sinners. How can the world be converted while professing Christians are conformed to the world? What good will it do to give money to send the gospel to the heathen when Christians live so at home? Well might the heathen ask, what profit will it be to become Christians when those who are Christians are pursuing the world with all the hot haste of the ungodly? The great thing necessary for the church is to break off from conformity to the world, and then they will have power with God in prayer, and the Holy Ghost will descend and bless their efforts, and the world will be converted. Objection. But if we dress so, we shall be called fanatics. Whatever the ungodly may call you, fanatics, Methodists, or anything, you will be known as Christians, and in the secret consciences of men will be acknowledged as such. It is not in the power of unbelievers to pour contempt on a holy church that are separated from the world. How was it with the early Christians? They lived separate from the world, and it made such an impression that even infidel writers say of them, these men win the hearts of the mass of the people, because they give themselves up to deeds of charity and pour contempt on the world. Depend upon it, if Christians would live so now, the last effort of hell would soon be expended in vain to defeat the spread of the gospel. Wave after wave would flow abroad till the highest mountain tops were covered with the waters of life. 3. In regard to politics. Objection. In this way, by acting on these principles and refusing to unite with the world in politics, we could have no influence in government and national affairs. I answer first, it is so now. Christians as such have no influence. There is not a Christian principle adopted because it is Christian or because it is according to the law of God. I answer secondly, if there is no other way for Christians to have an influence in the government, but by becoming conformed to the world and their habitual principles and parties, then let the ungodly take the government and manage it in their own way, and do you go and serve God. I answer thirdly, no such result will follow. Directly the reverse of this will be the fact. Only let it be known that Christian citizens will on no account assist bad men into office. Only let it be known that the church will go only for men that will aim at the public good, and both parties will be sure to set up such men. And in this way, the church could legitimately exert an influence by compelling all parties to bring forward only men who are worthy of an honest man's support. Commentary. Honest Abe, Abraham Lincoln, was influenced, I believe, by Charles Finney's sermons. We wouldn't have had an Abraham Lincoln if Charles Finney hadn't come before him. Think about that. Objection. In this way, the church and the world will be arrayed against each other. The world is too selfish for this. You cannot make parties so. Such a line can never be a permanent division. For 1 year, the ungodly might unite against the church and leave Christians in a small minority. But in the end, the others would form two parties, each courting the suffrages of Christians by offering candidates such as Christians can conscientiously vote for. Conclusion. 1. By nonconformity to the world, you may save much money for doing good. In 1 year, a greater fund might be saved by the church than has ever been raised for the spread of the gospel. 2. By nonconformity to the world, A great deal of time may be saved for doing good, that is now consumed and wasted in following the fashions and obeying the maxims and joining in the pursuits of the world. 3. At the same time, Christians in this way would preserve their peace of conscience, would enjoy communion with God, would have the spirit of prayer, and would possess far greater usefulness. Is it not time something was done? Is it not time that some church struck out a path and should not be conformed to the world and should be according to the example and spirit of Christ? You profess that you want to have sinners converted. But what avails it if they sink right back again into conformity with the world? Brethren, I confess I am filled with pain in view of the conduct of the church. Where are the proper results of the glorious revivals we have had? I believe they were genuine revivals of religion and outpourings of the Holy Ghost that the church has enjoyed the last 10 years. Commentary. Okay, the last 10 years. Finney says that his church had revivals. So we're talking about 1826 to 1836. Okay, and I continue. I believe the converts of the last 10 years are among the best Christians in the land. Yet after all, the great body of them are a disgrace to religion. Of what use would it be to have 1,000 members added to the church to be just as are now in it, to be just such as are now in it? Would religion be any more honored by it in the estimation of ungodly men? One holy church, that are really crucified to the world, and the world to them, would do more to recommend Christianity than all the churches in the country, living as they now do. Oh, if I had strength of body to go through the churches again, instead of preaching to convert sinners, I would preach to bring up the churches to the gospel standard of holy living. Of what use is it to convert sinners and make them such Christians as these? Of what use is it to try to convert sinners and make them feel there is something in religion, and when they go to trade with you, or meet you in the street, have you contradict it all and tell them by your conformity to the world that there is nothing in it? Where shall I look? Where shall the Lord look for a church like the first church that will come out from the world and be separate and give themselves up to serve God? Oh, if this church would do so. But it is of little use to make Christians if they are not better. Do not understand me as saying that the converts made in our revivals are spurious, but they live so as to be a disgrace to religion. They are so stumbled by old professors that many of them do more hurt than good. The more there are of them, the more occasion infidelity seems to find for her jeers and scoffs. Commentary. He's basically saying a lot of the people that got saved in his revivals in the past 10 years backslid, and it grieved him. Now, do you believe that God commands you not to be conformed to the world? Do you believe it? And dare you obey it? Let people say what they will about you. Dare you now separate yourselves from the world and never again be controlled by its maxims, and never again copy its practices, and never again will be whiffled here and there by its fashions. I know a man that lives so. I could mention his name. He pays no attention to the customs of the world in this respect. And what is the result? Wherever that man goes, he leaves the impression behind that he is a Christian. Oh, if one church would do so, and would engage in it with all the energy that men of the world engage in their business, they would turn the world upside down. Will you do so? Will you break off from the world now and enter into covenant with God and declare that you will dare to be singular enough to be separate from the world, and from this time set your faces as a flint to obey God, let the world say what they will? Dare you do it? Will you do it? Commentary. It's a great sermon, man. I mean, I think he spent a little bit too much time on the clothing subject, but I mean, it needs to be talked about. I really believe it, and a lot of people have tried to talk about it in some of the right-wing churches, but they usually denigrate themselves down to talking about women showing off their bodies in a sexual way, which kind of he's more so focused on. He's not focused on that. He's focusing on both men and women, mainly women, uh, showing off their clothing in a prideful way to show that they look rich or fancy, right? That's the thing, and it's that always wearing name brand stuff, chapped Ralph Lauren, preppy clothing, in other words, is what he's really preaching against here. He's preaching against wearing preppy clothing, and being vain about that, you know, keeping up with the Joneses with regard to country club type clothes, and um, yeah, that's what practically this entire sermon's about. So more power to you. If you can do that, God bless you.